Okay, fantastic. So today we're looking at models of blended learning, and I'm going to, before we go into the different models, I just want to very briefly talk about the learning design process that we have developed here at CPUT or adopted at CPUT, because it makes it why we focus on certain things than in the models of blended learning. And we'll go into that in more depth in the workshop. I hope you all have time to come to the workshop on the 18th and 19th of March, where you're actually going to go through such a learning design process. So today it's just a brief overview, and then some of the models of blended learning that I have witnessed here at CPUT, and then a little bit of discussion. But as I mentioned before, please stop me anytime if you have questions, if you want to comment on anything I say, if I'm too fast, if there's something that you don't understand, please just stop me. You can type, you can raise your hand, you can take the mic to make it a bit more interactive. And then I'll talk about the next steps and the assignments. Any questions so far for the program? All good. Okay, fantastic. So, as I said, we are using a very specific frame in our learning design process, and some of you have been to our workshops and have heard this before, but what we got really interested in is the idea of design thinking. So to think like a designer, so to encourage our e-learning champions or the people who are engaging with us and trying to innovate and use a little bit more blended learning in the teaching and learning, to think like a designer. And what that means is to put the needs of the people that you're designing for and with at the center of everything that you do. And for us, these are the learners. Really, anything we do, we should do in relation to our very, very specific learners. And these learners are different in different contexts. Even at CPUT, we don't have one type of learners, but we have many student personas with different needs, different access to resources, different motivations, and we have to have these learners at the center of our everything that we do. We have to think about the learners that we are designing for and ideally designing with. So design thinking has helped us. So design thinking is really the idea that one can learn to think like a designer. And how does a designer think? A designer thinks in patterns. They don't necessarily believe that there's one solution to a problem, but that there may be many solutions that one can try out. And also designers believe that you'll never be able to solve these difficult and complex problems on your own, but they will be trying to work in teams, in design teams, to find innovative solutions. And designers are very much about believing within intuition. So your learners, you have a lot of experience that you have gathered in the course of your practice, but there's also analytical research that we can draw on. So it's that intersection of what my gut tells me, my instinct tells me, and what Russian analytical research will tell me. And it's really important that people believe that we can learn to think a little bit more like a designer. And this is what we're trying to do with our workshops and our staff development interventions. And design thinking can be many different things, and there are many definitions about it. But at one point, it is an approach, and I'll talk about a typical design thinking model. And it can apply certain tools that I'm also going to present. But it's also about how we go about dealing with problems. And that links very closely to the ethos or to the mindset of a designer. And that is where we actually got really interested in this when we did our e-learning champions study. And we saw that these e-learning champions at the university share certain traits or characteristics. And these are things like believing in collaboration, in interdisciplinarity, in risk-taking, in experimenting, in seeing, things as playful and also reflective, and being very concerned about their learners, the empathy for the learners. So there are many things that these design innovators, that our e-learning innovators or champions share, and they're very closely aligned to this design thinking mindset. So what we are trying to do is just, at the university, that is very much characterized by people working in silos and on their own, and everything has to be perfect, and we have to make sure it works before we can move on, to create spaces where people can experiment a little bit more and work together and learn from each other and take risks and not try and be perfect, because if you work with technology, it will never be perfect. So this is what attracted us to design thinking. And this is a typical design thinking process. I mean, if there are many different graphs and images, but this is the typical process one goes through. You start with the user. So rather than starting, say, with the content that you have to teach, or your curriculum, you start with who is your learner and what do they need to learn and what do they bring to the table and what needs do they have. And this is where we work with persona development and bringing the students, and ideally you design with your learners. You invite your learners in, you talk to your learners, you understand where they are, where they're coming from, what they need from you. And then when you have established your need, your design challenge, you define, so from a very diverging open space where you bring a lot of information in, you converge to one design challenge, one design might be support our learners who are struggling to come to class because of transport problems to still be able to follow the curriculum, for example. Yeah? How can we bring in some flexibility for these learners? So you define a design challenge, and then you start again diverging, brainstorming. What are many different solutions that one could try? And then again, you converge, you pick one, and you try it out. You prototype, you try it out, you test, you see, has this actually met the need that I had identified at the beginning? So this is very briefly the typical design thinking process. So it is very much user-centered. It's very much centered around the learner, what they need, and it leverages the collective knowledge and wisdom that we have in all of us. This is why we like it, and it allows multiple avenues to respond to the same problem. There's not just one solution, there are many, and it allows you to explore and experiment and see what works for you in your context. So learning design is then the design for learning using design thinking ideas, so complex problem-solving processes that define what is to be learned, by why, and by whom, and in what context, and how this learning might be best supported. So it's a very much contextual, looking at the situation at hand and to see how might we best create a solution, a learning experience, appropriate pedagogic strategies and tools and technologies that would allow these needs to be met. Does that make sense? Quick feedback? Was that too quick? Are you happy? Have I lost you? Give me a thumbs up. All good. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So this is why we believe that design thinking in academic staff development really works, because it does recognize that there is no size fits all. If you know how we've been working with the PGDIPs, every PGDIP has a different kind of design because they all have different learners with different needs. Some can offer the courses fully online, some need some sort of face-to-face time for their learners. So you start with the empathy, with the focus on the learner, the why and for whom questions become really important. And we recognize that the challenges that we are facing are wicked, they're difficult to solve. There's no easy solution. It's complex, and it kind of gives us these constraints that some people argue we need to be really creative. Designers will argue that to be really, really innovative and creative, you actually need, the more constraints you have, the better. And you, as I said, you draw from the wisdom of the crowd, and you experiment. You're a little bit more playful and risk-taking than in your usual practice, maybe. And it's also about small steps. Over and over and over, people tell us they need to innovate in small steps. Otherwise, it's too scary. They can't go from one point. I mean, some people have done that. Like real estate was thrown in the deep end. Go develop an online diploma. We are going to offer it full-time online. So they couldn't do small steps. They were thrown in the deep end. But most of the people who don't have to prefer to take small iterative steps to see what works, what doesn't work, and innovate that way. So these are the kind of activities that we have found really help in this learning design process, the persona development, and we're going to do that in the workshop. Then defining the design challenge. Welcome, Megan. I'm just talking about design thinking, so all of this should be very familiar to you, so you have not missed anything. But welcome nevertheless. And then from the design challenge, we brainstorm solutions in groups. And ideally, you come as a design team, you work together, not just on your own, because you need that kind of collaboration engagement. And then you design, implement your interventions, your storyboard. We'll do that during the 2-day workshop. So these are just some pictures. So you'll see we'll have lots of post-its, lots of cookies, and we'll work on our courses together. Lots of discussions. It's quite a fun process. So I hope lots of you will be able to join us for that workshop. This is the persona, but I don't want to go into depth because this is what we're going to do during the workshop. So this was just an introduction into the learning design, and the important thing is why I did that is because now when I'm going to unpack some of the stories of blended learning, some of the models that people have applied or tested at CPUT, they always focus on the design, on the persona. So who are the students? Because for us, I want to reiterate that size, there's no size fits all. For us, it's very much who is that specific student in that specific classroom, in that specific context, for that specific discipline, and what is the model that fits that student's best. So we'll always talk about the kind of persona that we're designing for, and we will start with a design challenge, and then with a kind of solution that people found to respond to that design challenge. Any questions so far? All good. So what you see here is a diagram that I've picked from the CHE, the Council of Higher Education Guide on Good Flexible Learning and Distance Learning. That's a really useful guide if anybody is interested in moving towards a more online space. And it's one of the resources in our course site. And they argue that the typical split between campus-based and distance learning has been challenged. So what we used to have is traditional campus-based institutions who offered face-to-face campus-based learning. And then you had institutions such as UNISA who offer distance education. But what we have seen in the recent past, based on policies that changed and white papers that allowed campus-based education to offer also distance education, not just UNISA, but also UNISA recognizing that even within the distance education space, there's need for face-to-face tutorials, for example, so that has incorporated some local face-to-face support structures that the institutions are kind of coming closer together on a continuum of campus-based and remote. Yeah, so this model, on one hand, fully campus-based education and remote education, and it also shows you fully online and then fully offline and fully online on the other, how do you call it, on the other part of the diagram. And you can see how people are moving from fully offline and campus-based, which might have been the model 10, 15 years ago, towards a more blended hybrid model of delivery that uses more and more technology. So what I'm going to show you today is different models at CPUT who are somewhere on this map between campus-based and remote and fully offline and fully online. Does that make sense? Yeah. So if you had to position yourself on this diagram, where do you think you are in your teaching? Which quadrant would you say you are? You can take the mic, or you can just type blended hybrid sweater. Okay. And
can I talk?
Yeah? Sure, please.
I just find it easy to talk. I think blended on face-to-face, but we put a lot of stuff online on Blackboard for this to access. So more campus-based with a bit of blended.
Okay, so somewhere between campus-based and blended. And in terms of offline and online,
yeah,
would you say you're internet supported? Do your students need internet?
Yes,
If
well,
they
it works.
have, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, internet supported, definitely. Yeah.
So Sweta says also blended hybrid. Megan says the bottom B. Okay, somewhere there. So blended hybrid, digitally supported. And John says B and A. So A is quite remote. So students don't have to come to campus anymore, John?
Hi, good afternoon.
John? Yeah.
I think hi. I think what we're doing, we're trying to move towards that, and what we've realized is that with the access with EduRoam, so most of the municipalities they actually have EduRoam available in all the libraries and all the municipality buildings, which is in all the townships and everywhere. So now the students have access to internet, and some modules can actually put purely online for them. So small sections they can actually just conduct it on there itself. Remotely. Yeah.
Interesting. So you find that students' access to internet, it has become much better?
Yeah, I think it's much better than if I have to compare towards probably 2-3 years ago. And if you look at the Blackboard Analytics, it's more remotely. You can see people are accessing it off campus opposed to on campus access and using mobile devices. And I think with the app, it makes it actually even better.
Okay, fantastic.
For them.
That's good to hear. That's very positive because often we hear more the stories of how students cannot access and struggle, and so it's good to hear that there are other spaces too. But again, it's so important to know your students and what fits or what works for your students, and to understand that that might not be the same for everyone.
Because the one thing that we do have is we have electronic logbook where they log all their skills, all performances done throughout the year. And the issue always was where, so if they have to go into the field, how do they log the skills, because it needs to happen in real time. We actually found out that all the hospitals, all the government hospitals, they actually have EduRoam in the hospitals, which is available for all university students. So that actually took away, and students actually doing assignments during their work integrated learning or their work-based learning.
Okay, that's good to hear.
So internet is becoming a less of a problem. I think with Wi-Fi access, I think it's the /Facebook Wi-Fi polls that's been up and running, and now with the Google polls, it's actually even less of an excuse now to actually not have internet access.
Okay, thank you. Fantastic. So this is what I've been trying to say, that we are all moving. So whether we are on campus or off campus in distance education, we're moving from both sides more towards a mixed mode. And you can also see the different the continuum from no digital support to fully online. So I think we are also moving all more towards the fully online. We only have one program right now that runs fully online. But I think a lot of our programs are internet dependent. I think students will struggle if they don't have internet to access many of those that are offered online. So yeah, these, as you mentioned, these are just different courses that are on the spectrum, and all of us are somewhere here. And it's not to say, and I think that's really important, that it's not to say that one is worse than the other, because again, it depends on your students where you place yourself. But what's really interesting for me often is to discuss with lecturers where they want to move to. So where they are right now, and what they think the trajectory will be over the next year or so, and to start planning for that. I think that what this diagram makes is really interesting. So I have 4 or 5 case studies from CPUT, so lived case studies that I want to present. And I was hoping Yolanda could be here, because she is really one of our e-learning champions when it comes to offering blended learning and more flexible learning to her students. But unfortunately, she didn't make it. But one of her case studies is part of this presentation. But I want to start because often people get quite scared when I start with like the full scale online program that we have, like in real estate. So I thought, let me start really at the basic, just to show that blended learning can mean so many things to so many people. And as I said, often it is about the small steps that we can take towards more blended or flexible learning. So one of the case studies that I worked with was Lawrence MEDA, who unfortunately left us, but he was the teaching and learning coordinator in education, and he teaches ICTs for education to pre-service teacher educators. And he says he has this big class of students. Yeah, those are big classes, 90, 150 students that he has to teach this very generic ICTs for education course. And the problem is that he has this wide spread of personas, of student personas. He has some who are absolutely fine with technology, they have access, they've used it before. But then he also has quite a big group of students who have never used computers before, very little access to technology, and very low digital literacy skills. And he sits now with these students, they all sit in his class, and he has to motivate all of them. So his design challenge was really how can he increase student engagement in large classes without alienating students who are afraid of technology. Yeah, so he can't just go ahead and use all his fancy tools and make one part of his students happy who are already very proficient with digital technologies, but he has to find a way of engaging everyone. And one of the things that he tried, one of the tools that he tried, and these are the 6 ways of learning. If you have listened to last week's presentation, this is Laurie Lard's 6 ways of learning that she argues we all should kind of cover in our teaching to make meaningful and socially constructed learning experiences for our students. But one of the tools that he found that worked really well in his class is Kahoot. And I'm sure some of you, I know some of you have used this before, but it's such a simple tool, but it worked for his students and for his design challenge. So Kahoot, for those who don't know Kahoot, is it's a web-based Who Wants to Be a Millionaire tool. You ask questions, the students use their phones, and because they work in groups, and at least one of the group members has a smartphone and there's Wi-Fi in his classroom, they can actually then, in the group, discuss what answers and choose one of the 4 options. And then they very quickly see whether they got it right or wrong, and there's a leaderboard, and it's a very fun and easy and non-threatening way of engaging with technologies. And it also shows the power of the cell phones, and it gets students to use the cell phones more. There are other tools as well. If you don't have Wi-Fi, there's clickers. It's paper-based clickers, so you hand out these QR codes in your class. These are laminated papers, and all you need as a lecturer is a phone and an app, and you scan these QR codes and you get the same kind of result as the Kahoot. Poll Everywhere is, again, web-based. Your students have to use their phones, and you have a lot of quite interesting question types. But all it is, and all these things that do, the design principles of this tool is to get students engaged in class, to a quick way of understanding where they are, how they feel, what they understand. But it also adds an element of fun, which classes like Lawrence really needed because they're so big and students tend to very quickly shut down or disengage. So you have to find ways of bringing that kind of engagement back in. And, you know, one of his problems was how can the ones who know more, you know, help those who know less. So by putting them in groups, he started those kind of peer support learning spaces. And one has a laptop or a phone and can help others. So to use the power of those who know more and the power of the group to help those who know less. And you start in the classroom. So the first problems that you find that people have with technology, you can help them in the classroom. So you don't start with assignments or activities outside the classroom for people who are already afraid of technologies. And you start with familiar tools and practices like a cell phone. And then from that, you take small steps and you bring them into more difficult spaces and tools and technologies. Does that make sense? This is really one of the more basic or simple ways of using tools and making teaching and learning more blended. So the second case study, this is very different kind of student personas. This is BRONWYN SWARTZ, who is another one of our e-learning champions. She teaches statistics for quality in engineering, in the Department of Integrated Systems and Engineering, DICE. So her persona, her typical student is male, is isiXhosa as a home language, so English is not the first language. They're mature, as you can see. They're part-time students, so they have already a lot of work experience. They have access to technology. They have the digital literacy skills. So these are very different personas than the ones that Lawrence had in his classroom. And they're all working in industry, and they want to become more involved in quality management. So a very different group of students. And then still, Fees Must Fall happened. That was her design challenge. That's how she started using e-learning or blended learning much more intensively, because she wanted to continue teaching while Fees Must Fall happened and why students could not come to the classroom. So her first design challenge, which then later got her into using much more of Blackboard in her normal, when the campuses were open again, is how can we use technology to continue teaching when campuses are closed? So she used a lot of tools. But again, she had used these tools already with her students, so they were already familiar with Blackboard. They had already started submitting assignments. They had already done small tests on Blackboard. So she could move quite easily with her students into an online space. And rather than teaching them in class, she created screencasts for them. So she recorded herself at home and then shared these screencasts with her students, and they responded using the discussion forum, but also WhatsApp became really important. She put these screencasts on YouTube, and students continued learning during times of disruption. But because this worked so well for her, she actually started using screencasts a lot more, and she moved to a sort of flipped classroom. So she gave students screencasts in advance, they listened to it, and then she uses the class time when they meet for much more discussion and interactive and engaging work. And so these are some of her screencasts that are available on YouTube. So even other students who do statistics can make use of her screencasts, and she has become quite good at making short and very engaging and fun. You can see they're all about 12, 11, 10 minutes. This is actually 14, 15, might even be too long for these kind of screencasts to keep attention. And she's very good at making them fun and, you know, and entertaining, because statistics can be quite a boring and dry matter, but she has a really performative character. So I think her personality comes through in these screencasts. She makes jokes. So this is the flipped classroom. I'm sure you've heard about this. So it's the idea that you move the lecturing outside the classroom and you actually use the homework, the problem solving, the project work. You use the classroom time for that, where people actually engage and discuss and are more active and can ask questions if they have. And then she has moved even one step further, and she has actually asked her students to create their own screencasts in their home language. So as one of the assignment, that 3rd or 4th year students create screencasts in different African languages with English subtitles for their peers to learn from. So she will present some of the content in class, and then the students create these learning resources in their home language, which is, I think, revolutionary, because there is no local content available at the moment. And the students know exactly what other students need and how they can explain something that everybody else would understand. So her design principles that she drew or that she developed in her work is that what's really important is to build a relationship with students, to have communication channels open so you know and you can get quick feedback to what works and what doesn't, to listen to your students, to take their feedback on board. She tried all sorts of platforms. She first posted her videos on Blackboard. That didn't really work. Then she posted them on Google Drive. Again, it didn't really work. And then when she finally posted them on YouTube, her students were happy because it seemed to be the most adaptable or flexible platform in terms of your bandwidth. Try and test and redefine. So try out things, test them, see what works and what doesn't, and move on if it doesn't, and try something new. Allow the personal in, allow imperfection. She's very imperfect in her recordings, but she says her students actually like that. It keeps them engaged. It feels like the lecturer is actually talking to them. and prepare your students, scaffolding. In the meantime, I think she's doing, all her exams are online, but she had to try a lot of first get students used to the platform, do self-tests, do little tests, weekly tests, and then do the online exam at the end. So that was the second case study. Are you still following? Any questions? All good? It's been very quiet. I hope I haven't. All good. Okay, fantastic. You're still there. So the third case study, and you can see how we are slowly getting more complex. So that it was, some of you have been part of this short course that we offered, I think, for 3 years. That short course has somehow now moved online because we found that lectures really struggled with the face-to-face workshop time. But the idea for this short course was to have a very specific, so when we started planning for our this short course, we kind of developed our own personas that we work with, and we came up with these 3 very distinct personas that we engage with in our staff development. And one are the e-learning champions. So they are the ones who are willing and interested, and they come to all the workshop anyway, and they develop their own practice, and we learn as much from the e-learning champions as they learn from us. It's more a relationship. It's a mutual relationship where we egg each other on and we push each other our boundaries, and it's an easy relationship to work with because they're kind of the ones who want to innovate and are interested in technology. On the other side of the spectrum, we have a persona that's a really good teacher. They know exactly, they've taught for many, many years, and they know what they're doing. The students love their lecturing, their performance in the lectures, but they are so good in what they're doing, they actually don't see any need for using technology. So no matter what we do, they're not going to engage with us because what they do works for them anyway. But then there's this persona in between who is quite interested, and they're coming to our workshops, but we find they're really struggling to transfer what they have heard in our workshops into their own practice. They're a little bit scared. They're a bit, they're not at the forefront of the innovation. They're more the followers. So they need somebody to take their hand and help them along and give them the kind of support and the reassurance that we are there if anything fails. So we have really developed that short course for that persona. So people who need that little bit more support, and we found our monthly seminars that we offered did not give these lectures enough support to actually try out and creative confidence to try this out. So what we developed was this workshop that ran, so our design challenge is how can we use technology to encourage more lecturers to innovate their teaching. So we developed this short course that it was initially, I think, 10 weeks. Eventually we cut it down to 5 weeks, quite intense. We had face-to-face workshops, I think 4, and in between we had online webinars. And we made it very clear it's for academics who have had some experience with Blackboard, for example, some training, but they need that follow-up support. We encourage people to sign up as course teams, to collaborate and support each other in the department. And we kept it the presentations were very short, but it was mostly a demonstration of tools and lots of design activities. And the goal was to develop one blended learning intervention for their teaching and actually to try it out immediately, week by week. So it was this idea of rapid prototyping. So every week we introduced a tool and we said, try it out. And the next week, come back and reflect and tell us how it went. So in some ways, it encouraged them to do things. They knew they were not on their own. There were a whole group of people trying it out. But it also positioned them as experts, as somebody who did things, and they came back and they reflected and they found ways of how it worked and how it didn't work. And they needed that kind of mentoring and coming back and reflecting. And we brought all these into the space to help them and to give them courage to try these things out. We used a lot of different tools, so people found it quite, overwhelming at the beginning, but it was really well spaced. And week by week, we tried out new things, and we came back and we encouraged people to immediately use it, reflect on it, try, see how it works, how it doesn't work, and move on to the next tool. So I think the kind of design principles that emerged for us from that space, and I must say, for 2 years it worked really, really well. We had a lot of people who enrolled, and most of them finished. The third year, something shifted. I don't know if we had covered all of those who wanted to come and actually do this. The third year, we had a lot more problems with people coming. They came maybe for one workshop, didn't come for the next. And that's why we then decided to try this online course that we are running now. But what we saw, what was really important, is that we had to create a safe space for people to experiment, to take risk and fail, and to challenge those attitudes of perfectionism that we're really trying to work with. We modeled a design on the go approach. So we designed on the go. We responded to people's needs. We designed. Sometimes it was quite exhausting for participants because things kept shifting and changing and deadlines. But we wanted for them to see that how one can design on the go and respond to the immediate needs. It was very iterative, the iterative process of redesigning, small steps, the scaffolding. So we modeled, we gave support, but we also let people do their own thing. Foregrounded blended learning, and we introduced design thinking kind of implicitly through our activities. And it was very difficult, but I think it was very important to have that balance between playfulness and trying out things and creating this experimental space, but also reflecting on what worked. And for us, it's always this growing of a community of practice to collaborate, help transfer design thinking into departments. So we keep working with these people and we keep following up, and we use them. So we invite them back, we invite them back to help us present at our Teaching and Learning with Technology days or at our seminars. So we also provide all these opportunities for them to share and showcase their work. And hopefully that can then translate into the departments. So this is an email that I got from one of the participants, and I thought that was really, that is the persona that we were trying to support with our course, you know. So she just said, I want to thank you for an amazing workshop. I've learned such a lot as an IT challenged person. So that's exactly the person we were trying to engage, who can't even really use the TV without the help of my 16-year-old, and now feel confident really start including more blended learning in my course, and to encourage and even assist my colleagues. And this is really what we're trying to do. This way, I'm sure we'll be able to reach more students. Okay, bye, Jared. See you soon. So there's a saying, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. So I was definitely in the right room. I learned so much from everyone who attended and the facilitator. So this was really encouraging for us, because that is the design challenge. That is the persona that we were designing for. And to hear from her that it worked helped us a lot. So this is then this is now Yolanda's mocha. So we are moving, as you can see, we are moving towards more and more blended learning. So Yolanda Mock in Architectural Technology, I think, was one of the first at CPUT to start thinking about how one could offer more flexible learning. And so she collaborated with Open Architecture, which is a business, it's an organization who works from Pretoria, I think, and they offered the first part-time BTech course that was using a lot of online learning with their students. And these are students, again, very different personas, students who are already in the workplace, who need flexibility. So they want to improve their qualifications, they're hard time working, very mature students, they have work experience, but they need a BTech to move on in their careers. But they're working, so they cannot come to CPUT for full-time programs. And they can work online or flexible space because they're all in the workplace, they have access to computers, they have access to the internet, and again, they have the digital literacy skills to do so. So her challenge was to create and maintain an online interface that achieves the rich and engaging learning that are usually characterizing a traditional architectural technology studio. So if I understand her discipline, it's, you know, why architectural technology or any studio-based disciplines are really resistant to blended learning or online learning is because they're saying what happens in the studio is so hard to recreate online that rather not try it. And Yolanda said, I'm going to do that. I'm going to try to recreate for my students the kind of experience you have in a studio in an online space. So if you look at the kind of model, she had a very blended way of learning, because she had on-campus block sessions where students came 3 times a year, I think, for about a week, and got intense engagement with lecturers and experts in the field and each other. But then a lot of learning also happened office-based when they were off campus. And it happened both, you know, face-to-face, both in the block release when they had face-to-face engagement with the facilitators. Also in the office, there was face-to-face with their mentors. They had a memorandum of understanding with employers. They knew that the students needed support and mentorship and had to work on work-related projects. So there was some face-to-face engagement in the off-campus spaces as well, but there was a lot of online engagement as well. Both in the blogs, they used a lot of technology, but mainly online. So she created this whole space for online studios where they used webinars, Skype first, and then they moved to others, and gave online crits to students' work that they submitted before. And they invited other students into these crit sessions as well. So it wasn't just a one-to-one conversation between the lecturer and the student, but the peers could listen in and could learn from each other's crit sessions. And these crit sessions were recorded. So they were also very important resources for later on to listen again what the lecturers gave feedback to. So again, the design principles that resulted from her design or from her experiences is very similar to what our experiences were, to focus on what works, the small steps, the small wins, prototype, and then use that to move on. And she moved from campus-based to blended learning, but also to make learning designs iterative. So she designed in really small steps. She first focused on her campus-based learning and integrated some tools and Facebook and things in there and blogs. And then from these experiences, that gave her then the confidence to move to the part-time. And now they're actually offering a part-time advanced diploma, and it's only part-time. The first year is fully online. It's people in employment who can just continue the work experience. They were in their diploma. The last 6 months they spent at work in a workplace. What is it called? Not in-service learning. It's work-based learning. And because the advanced diploma is now offered in a blended learning as well, they can just continue staying in their employment and start studying online while they're there. And again, just come in for blocks. Exactly, work integrated learning. Sorry, exactly, Megan. So, and she said what was really important for her to involve external partners. If you feel that at CPUT you're not getting anywhere or you're pushing boundaries, working with external partners often opens up avenues that were not possible before, and to listen to your students. So she had very close relationships to her students and listened what worked for them and included them into the learning design. So this was her tools. So a lot of social media that she used. She's a big Facebook fan, so she has a very vibrant Facebook group where her students engage. But she uses a lot of Blackboard as well, Zoom as webinars for the online crit sessions. So again, it's a mix of all sorts, whatever works for her. And she moves from one tool to the next, year by year, to find what actually works for her students. And then the final case study that I'm going to show you today or talk about is Sarita's Real Estate. I think some of you have heard me talk about this. This is really our flagship because it's the first program that's offered fully online at CPUT, and it's still the only one that's offered fully online. So there are no blog sessions. There are some, but they're not compulsory. People can come and listen, but they don't have to. So if people want to, can do this real estate full distance. And again, the typical student, and that's why this is so important to think about it, is very mature. There are quantity surveyors or real estate. They're somehow employed in the property industry. Real estate agents, they're on the go, they're on the move. But many of them, for example, looking either for promotion or actually a new retirement plan, a career change to become property valuers. So that, again, they cannot come to campus. They cannot just attend a 3-year diploma and come to classes every day. They need flexibility. So this is why, and there are many. I mean, that diploma has 200, 300 students enrolled online from all over South Africa. And it's the only, as far as I know, it's the only program offered at the moment, the only diploma in real estate that's offered in this way. So the demand is huge. And that's also one of the arguments often is that if you offer fully online courses, your subsidy halves. But if you have all these students, then it's okay. So again, you have to look at your course and how many students are you enrolling, and is it actually viable? Does plan make sense? In this case, it does, because they have such a big demand. So that is a design challenge clause. How can we use technology to support students who are in full employment and on the go all the time? Again, these are mature learners. They are very disciplined. They're very organized. They can learn on their own. They have access to laptops. They have access to data. So they can actually engage in fully online learning. But what's really interesting here is that it pushes our boundaries even to think about flexibility, because we often think about flexibility in terms of how we offer content, yeah, and where people can access content. But flexibility is so much more. It's about mission criteria. How much do you accept recognition of prior learning? I mean, these are people who have had careers, you know, lifetime of work experience. How can that feed into their RPL portfolio? How do you design flexibly for students, yeah, who are mostly unemployed, but some are also unemployed? So all the projects, the assignments that you give, that often then are very much workplace based. How do you deal with that if somebody's unemployed and doesn't have access to a workplace? How do you flexible delivery? That is, you know, how do you offer content in flexible ways? In their case, it's through Blackboard, and again, they record a lot of screencasts, and they offer other ways of supporting the students. But flexible support systems also mean that these students are mostly going to study at night, weekends, when, for example, our library is closed, our IT support is non-existent. So how do you create flexible support systems for these kind of students? All of these things are really important to consider. So this is just some of the feedback that we got from students in some research we did. And we asked them, what does flexibility mean to you? And you can see what they say. You know, I could do my day work, and in the evening I read my books, and I respond to assignments or tests, you know, or the time given for tests and assignments. I was able to write even if I'm working, that one can study at your own pace and time. So for them, that was really, really important, because they were all, most of them were in employment. But for example, what didn't work for them at all is Facebook. You know, something that worked really well for Yolanda students, they were not interested. They're not interested in collaboration. They want to just get the diploma as quickly as they can. They're very focused. They're very strategic and need this qualification to move on. They're not interested in networking and meeting other. Very different from, say, Yolanda's study personas who are much younger. They are in employment, but they're still in their 20s. And for them, networking is really important. So again, so important to see that, you know, what works for one context doesn't necessarily work for another context. And what from Sarita's case study, what the kind of design principles emerge for them. Yes, Ryan, do you have a question?
I don't have a question. I just have a comment on the learners. We just completed, or we just published, or in the process of publishing a study we completed in our own department regarding learning preferences. And we also found that the older students, and we've got, I mean, we have students in their 50s, were not really interested in group work or working together with people. You know, they've all got families, all got kids. They pretty much know what they want. So they come to class to get the knowledge. They've already got their networks in place. And so that they don't want to do group work. They don't want to, you know, if they could stay at home and study, they would. And same, if they have to ask other people, they typically don't ask lecturers or people on campus. They already know people in industry who they go and ask with a difficult concept. So that sort of thing really, it echoes what she found.
Yeah, what Sarita also said is, for them, WhatsApp, for example, worked really well, but they created their own study groups. They found people in the area where they were based, and they created. So all Sarita had to do, she had a big Excel spreadsheet where the students could put in their details. So they gave permission to share their privacy. You know, with the POPI Act, you have to be a bit careful, but they all basically gave permission to share their details, their contact details, so they could find people in there close by. And then they created informal WhatsApp support groups, and they often also met face-to-face. So that worked for them. But it's so interesting how you can't take this and then just translate that into a different space. You have to find the design that works for you and your students. Thank you for that, Ryan. So Sarita, yeah, the kind of design principles that were important for her is to be very explicit about expectations. They got better and better every year to tell people, if you enroll in the online, in the fully online distance course, you need this kind of equipment. You need that kind of data every month. So to make sure people understand what they're getting into, consider your target group, to offer flexibility in terms of content, assignment, support, but to also be consistent, because there's no time you're meeting these students to explain how learning is going to happen. So the kind of learning support that you usually give in a lecture has to be given through your learning guides, through your study guides, through the way your courses are structured on Blackboard. So make sure your course designs are the same across all subjects so that students don't get confused. You have to provide clear learning paths. So you have to think a lot more what you communicate and how you communicate students, and to help them set up those learning routines if they're on their own. So to be very consistent with deadlines, to give deadlines far in advance, to make sure that the assignment deadlines are not all on the same day. So you have to also coordinate between the different modules much more. You have to have a lot of opportunity to practice, especially if you go and do the exams online. And the informal peer support that I was talking about, that was really for them to be able to set it up. And for the staff, they need ongoing capacity development. They were thrown in the deep end, but they had to learn quite quickly. But you also need to offer that and to learn from each other. So as you can see, the peer-to-peer support here was really important. There were about 50% said they were in WhatsApp groups. 20% had set up study groups, very few online meetings. So people still want to work, meet face-to-face. So she used Responders Monitor and the lockdown browser for the online exams. So students could actually do their exams online wherever they were. And I don't know if you know the Responders Monitor, but it's basically, it uses your webcam and it records everything you do. And the moment you look to the side, or the moment there are two people in front of the monitor, it will flag that. So you can see if people are trying to cheat or, you know, move and look up something. But again, it's never fail-proof, and it takes, you know, it needs a lot of conversations around what kind of exams make sense in such an online space. So people were very happy with the online assessments and online assignments. A lot of people actually, although we had offered, or she had offered the participants to also write their exams face-to-face, they could come to an exam center, but most of them actually preferred doing them online. So this brings me to the end of my presentation, and you can see how, I hope what I've tried to show you today is that no matter where you start, you know, you can find models depending on your persona, on how comfortable you are, depending on your context and your disciplines. There's a trajectory that we can see at CPUT where people move from a very small steps, trying small tools in the classroom, and to move towards a more online space. But the experiences are there, and it's really interesting to see these different models that emerge at the institution, to see what works and what doesn't. Are there any questions? Any feedback? Does it resonate with you? Yeah, John?
So we have all the courses, so the program that's online. How does quality of the courses, or how's that managed in terms of, you know, is there some sort of quality rubric that because now we have our subject guides that guides us how subject should be done. Mm-hmm. But is there anything like, because I know when I'm used to use D2L at a different institution and I worked, and mm-hmm. we used to use Quality Matters, a rubric checklist for online courses. So mm-hmm. all the courses that we do online needed to follow that type of rubric. And some mm-hmm. of the things is, one of the standards they looked at is instructional materials. One of the thing was instructional materials. Instructional materials contribute to achievement of learning objectives. So how the materials that was produced or that the student mm-hmm. engaged with, does it actually contribute to achievement of the learning objectives, and how mm-hmm. how are you going to make sure that objectives is achieved during the sessions? Because now we can only assess it in the exams to see if it was achieved, but it needs to be mm-hmm. we need to see continuously if there's achievement and if there's engagement of the content. Yeah. Is there a direction where we can go? Like, for instance, we have our guideline for the for subject guides, but not for not for our actual for online, for the online.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and actually something we've been sitting with, because so when I was working at the University of Botswana, we developed a benchmarking rubric for online courses to look at different aspects of e-learning, and content is one, and support is one, and communication, and there are many different areas, and social presence and facilitation of online spaces. So. But we haven't developed anything like that at CPUT yet. And there is the learning analytics tool, as you know, which can show us, in some ways, it can give us an idea of how varied and what tools are being used, and whether it's just content or people are using other things as well. But especially in a space like CPUT, where we still focus so much on blended learning. So, we have both the face-to-face and the online and the different ways of engaging. We can't just use the online, the learning analytics, as a sole indicator for quality. So it's something that we really have to sit and think about, how to assess the quality of the online learning, because it is difficult to assess, and it's also very complex, and it has so many facets. But that's definitely something we have to look into. Thank you for that, John. Is there anything else that people want to ask or comment on? Thanks, Megan, for your feedback. I'm glad you enjoyed this. And I saw we have got a new participant, Nasli. Hi, welcome. Unfortunately, we are at the end of the presentation, but we recorded it, so you can just listen to what you missed. Any other comment? Any other feedback? Yes, Rita, please take the mic.
I'm just looking at the last PowerPoint slide that you just put, where the trajectory says, like, literally moving from fully offline to fully online. And I'll speak about myself. I feel like, me as a lecturer, I would still keep it hybrid or blended, whatever the space can be accurately called. Because for me, I would, and obviously the curriculum still says it has to be face-to-face. I would personally love to see the students engaging and interacting, because that gives me kind of a feedback saying what I'm doing, or be it assessments or content loaded online, and all of that, which is happening in a virtual space, is making sense, and that they have understood, and it is going to help them in future in whatever form. So, I mean, in a nutshell, what I wanted to say, that going fully online might be great, because we have big universities in South Africa doing and offering the ODEL form of education, but I would still hold in between a bit back, where I can still see my students and I can still see them giving feedback and interacting with me and with their peers, which is their friends here. So I don't know if it makes sense for me to say this, but just on the last slide, yeah.
And it makes total sense, because you know your students, and to move fully online, you have to have a very specific reason, And most people move online because the students can't come to campus, because they need that kind of flexibility. But if they can come to campus, I mean, face-to-face engagement is the best. I mean, it's very difficult. Although I must say, I'm really happy, because today there's a bit more engagement. I remember there was one session, I think webinar 2, where I was like talking to myself. So it does help. You can have online engagement in an online space as well. But the face-to-face, if you can see somebody's, expression, if you can read their body language, that's fantastic. So it is all about finding the right model for your space, for your context, for your students. I hope I've made that crystal clear. I would never say let's all move online. But if it helps, and in some cases, when even fourth-year students, once they're more mature and you have established a relationship with them, you know them, and they struggle to come to class because of whatever reason, then you can also move a few lectures online. But it has to make sense for you. Does that resonate, Sweta?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, but I think, yeah, like I said, I love being in a class. I love speaking to the students, and they do a lot of fun and humor, and so there's like two sides of me with them, which is the fun one and then the serious mode one, and I think that's what makes me go to work every morning, because I know I'm going to have a moment with them.
Yeah,
so
I agree. Great. Anybody else want to comment or say something? John, yeah?
So what I've noticed, you've used different tools to run this workshop itself, the blended model. Now, with CPUT that's invested a lot of money into the Blackboard, would you say that we should use one modality, using the Blackboard platform to get everybody into that space, or should we, where you use the Google Docs, you use the Google Sites, then you use certain other things to pull in information? What would you suggest that we do when we create something? Should we stay on this ecosystem, on the Blackboard ecosystem, or should we diverse also? Because I mean, for me, for me it was easy to move between the different platforms, but for a student, how would they be will they be actually accepted going from a Google Sheet to a Google to Blackboard, then back to something else?
It's a tricky one, because I mean, the Blackboard is our institutional LMS, and that's where we record we record our data. We use it for learning analytics. All the assessments should be on Blackboard. That's the secure institutional space. But I'm one for trying out many different tools and technologies. So I can't be limited to Blackboard. I'll try out whatever works, But again, I follow my students, and if the students are happy to experiment, I will also experiment. If they're already struggling with Blackboard, then I'll stay on Blackboard. But it's a tricky one. What do people think? What are other experiences? Blackboard versus other tools, or combining tools. I think in general, the next generation LMS, the way they talk about it, will be able to incorporate all sorts of tools. I think that's the future. That's where we're moving towards, but we're not there yet. So, yeah, Ryan?
I think while we've got students who are not, well, my experience rather is that when you've got students who are not maybe as comfortable with all the online apps, etc., it is better to just have one or two platforms initially, while everybody builds up acceptance of it before we start moving around. I must admit, when I was on that short course, and also on the diploma, I felt very overwhelmed by all the different apps. There was Kahoots, and then there was to create little avatars, and then there was constantly all the time, and eventually I just left it all, and then gradually started again with one or two apps myself. And now I'm more comfortable moving between different platforms and different programs. But initially, it's always, for me, it was better just to stay on one. And I think it would be better for a student as well, just to stay on one or two. And then once there's this thing that, we often get that people are, we have this idea that especially younger people are digital natives, but they're not actually, they're digital consumers. But when you have to start producing things and moving between things, it's actually they're not actually as comfortable as what we like to think they are. So I think maybe sticking to one platform initially and then building it up from there over time, maybe a better way.
Yeah, makes sense. And again, your students, and some of our students are very conversant with social media apps and are there anyway all the time. So there's it's all about who your students are, and the most important thing is, try and talk to your students as much as you can and see where they're on. My little one is on TikTok. I have no idea about TikTok. I've never been on TikTok myself, but that's where he is. Yeah. So it's all about following your students' leads in some ways as well, and what works for you. So yeah, it's very hard to give a fast one answer, but what's important is to think about auditing and and security and analytics and what needs to be on the institutional system and where can you experiment and play. I think that's the most important thing. Like in the TDP now, I've given an assignment for our session, and it's 2 parts. One is a Flipgrid video to just reflect and introduce yourself, and that's really a social activity for people to get to know each other. I'm not going to mark that. They have to do it. It's a duly passed. They have to get a tick. But then there's an assignment on Blackboard where I've asked them to reflect on one of the most innovative things they've done with tools, with technologies, and that now I'm going to mark in a rubric. So I think it's a mix of playfulness and experimentation and following your students, and the kind of more rigid assessment regimes that CPUT has. Any other comments or feedback? Nasli, yes, Ryan?
Just one thing, just to ask is and I would like to, in some posing to the group, now to everybody in line here, is one thing I'm becoming really uncomfortable with is taking an attendance register. We use the Blackboard Quickly Attendance app, but with more and more content being on Blackboard, a lot more being videos with the ability to, to have used Blackboard Ultra like we are now, I sometimes feel like a fool requiring people to be in class, because the more blended you get, the less you physically, or the less campus-based you get. I'm really just taking attendance because I'm required to. I just want to know what everybody thinks about this. Should we allow students to have their attendance in essentially a campus-based program, but have their attendance recorded by interaction on a platform like Blackboard? If you interact on Blackboard, you've attended the class.
What do people think? Yes, Victor, go ahead. Sweta? We can't hear you. You have to type. You have to click on the mic.
Oops, sorry, my bad. I'm not sure if I'm probably be able to answer Ryan, but I'll just say what I do is, because for me, how much ever content, whatever they're doing online, they have to be in the class, because I need to really see that they're understanding and that it is them who have downloaded the content and written the test, and which means they have understood at least some part of it. So I do the classroom attendance, and you have an option where you can tick all, and then obviously in the class you know who all are absent, then you untick them. But if you're doing it online, so the current advanced diploma that we started this year, we have block release, where me as a subject lecturer will probably run webinars in between over a weekend, and that is just to give time to everybody to be present. And if I don't know, I might be wrong, if everyone is attending the webinar, at least a part of the session, say out of an hour, if they at least an hour or so, as an example, then I would consider that as a way of attendance, because then they were present. And we're not having it on a weekday so that people can say, okay, I'm working, or I'm with a client, or in a meeting. At least weekend and a convenient evening session in a weekend. So then that might be a way of saying, okay, that person attended, so that is a tick. So yeah, I don't know, Daniela, you must still add on, or I'm not sure if I'm answering it well.
I think that makes a lot of sense. If participation, if whatever I do in class, they can listen to a podcast or screencast. Why force them to be in class? But if in class you're doing things that they really need, like discussion and engagement and problem solving and group work, then I think class time should be used for that, you know.
Yeah,
Hi,
so for me, in the class, I do case studies and we do a lot of role play. So for them to be able to answer a case study or to be part of a role play, it's really expected of them to have studied what I have preloaded before they come to the class. So then, I mean, the attendance is a must, and in some classes there is a portion of mark allocated as well. So then they are indirectly forced to be prepared before they come to the class.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
That's great. That's a flipped classroom in some ways. So Megan, you're saying that you give additional, if I'm giving additional information over and above the literature that's available on Blackboard, there's a missing link in the understanding. I found that when I cover search engine optimization, I assume the ability to apply the skill is marginally less than those who just read through the notes. Do you want to expand on that, Megan? Not sure I understand what you're trying to say. Do you have a mic? Natalie is also typing. Natalie says, many of my students feel that students should be present in class not only for theory but for role modeling and the transfer of soft skills. Yes, that's true. Very, very good. Okay, Megan will type. Yeah, Natalie, I agree. There's a lot we can even just role model our identity as professional, whatever, nursing educators, architects, EMS. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that people learn through just engaging with us. I absolutely agree. And that's hard to transfer online. Very hard. It's a skill. Yeah, so it's okay. So if people are happy, I'm just going to, this is my final slide, which just shows you, you know, the kind of dilemmas that we're sitting in, because we all want to offer flexibility to allow people to access teaching and learning at their own pace. But there's also structure that needs to be in place. People need to complete assignments and exams at a certain time. They have to interact socially. As you see, the importance of role modeling and the whole academic literacy is also a big question. How do they learn that on their own? So it's always this balance that we're trying to keep. But thank you so much for joining us today and for all the input and comments and feedback. Next week is the last webinar. I think it will be Tuesday. I hope you'll make it. Barbara, who is running the online assessment, can't do Wednesday, but it will be offered on Tuesday. And then the week after, we have our design thinking workshop. And I hope you can all make it. Can you just give me a thumbs up if you're planning to come to the workshop on the 18th and 19th of March? Okay, Brian can be there on the 19th. Natalie will be there. Fantastic. John on the 18th. Okay. Natalie, you'll be both days, yeah? Sweat on the 18th. John on the 19th, maybe. Okay, fantastic. Great. Perfect. So, and just to remind you, I don't know, last week I sent the link to the, if you, I mean, I don't know what your expectations for this course is, but if you want more than a certificate of participation, if you want a completion or distinction, you have to do the reflective assignments, reflective activities every week. You can do them later, but there will be a deadline. There will be a cutoff shortly after the workshop. So if you want more than the certificate of participation, please do those reflective activities on the Google Doc. Are there any questions around the activities or assignments? Okay, fine, perfect. Thank you. Then I will stop the recording and